Too often I find people, Dave, that it's not that they don't feel love, they don't see themselves as lovable.
Hello, and welcome back to Religion to Reality, where this episode we're going to take a look at spiritual direction from our own experiences to what the data can tell us about its efficacy and accessibility. I'm your host, Dave Plisky, joined by my friend and co-host, Father John Gribowich. I actually want to start off today with something I've been thinking about recently from Marshall McLuhan's book, The Medium and the Light. You know, we've been hearing so much from the people that we've been talking to about how listening is sacred, how important listening is in the everyday of living out your life, your integrated life. And I think that that's never more important than when we are in spiritual direction, or what we are taught through spiritual direction, right, is to be listening to that voice of God in our lives. So for those of you who don't know, McLuhan was a media ecologist of, I think, a very prophetic voice in the latter half of the 20th century, who was examining how we create technology, but then the technology in turn shapes us. And what is that doing for us? And here in The Medium and the Light, in this chapter, he's talking about how church communications need to be geared towards the youth in order to be effective. And so I want to read to you a portion of the book where he's talking about listening versus hearing. So he says, and by the way, I say book, and yes, it is a printed book. However, this chapter happens to be a dialogue that he was having with his interlocutor, Babin. So anyway, he says, to express their idea of communication, the kids use terms from the electronic and acoustic worlds: to be right on, to be with it, to be in, to catch the right vibes, turn on and tune in. And that is the message of St. Matthew's gospel. That is, to tune into the right frequency. May those who have ears to hear, let them hear. Most people, however, do not have ears for hearing, but only for listening. To listen is to blinker yourself, to restrict the eyes, as it were, to grasp the way the words arrive, what the speaker is saying. But to hear is to put yourself on the same wavelength as the speaker. Christ himself uses this metaphor. He speaks of listening as opposed to hearing. The scribes were listeners. They looked at texts. It is written, but I say to you, but they understood nothing. They had no ears for hearing, but only for listening. The same situation repeats itself today. You may have all the necessary titles and degrees, but be on the wrong wavelength. So, John, I wanted to bring this to you because in some ways, I often think of these terms almost the other way around, where like you can hear something, but did you really listen? He's saying you can listen to something, but did you really hear?
Right.
What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting thing because I was thinking the exact same thing, Dave. I mean, listening always seems to be the one where it's so proactive, so intentional, that like you really are taking this in and you want to let it process. But he says the exact opposite. And maybe, that's something we got to listen to, no pun intended. Like, what does it mean to hear something? I think I just have to let it sit a little bit, because I almost am thinking that like hearing something means that you are able to hear maybe the longing or just the emotion or the intensity behind what someone is saying. Like I hear your cry, so to speak. I hear what you're saying is something that we say when we really want to let someone know that we are listening to them. So maybe he is onto something. I clearly is, because McLuhan is a genius. So I want to sit with that. Like, how am I hearing you? Do I really hear you out? I mean, I think that's something that we can definitely play around with.
Agreed. So let us sit with that as we start to listen to some of these conversations that we have with folks around spiritual direction. For this week's episode, we spoke with 3 different guests who all have different and unique insights into the process of spiritual direction. The first up is my own spiritual director, Mary Glowaski. She is based in Fort Wayne. And I was, at the time of this recording, I was on campus at Notre Dame last week, and she came out to South Bend to meet me, and I got to meet her in person for the very first time. We normally have Zoom sessions, so it was a beautiful meeting, and she is just such a wonderful person. So we spoke about some of our own experiences and how a spiritual director can adapt to meet the individual needs of the person they're directing. You mentioned the term gentle a few times, and that is definitely something, so full disclosure, you are my spiritual director. That's how we know each other. And I've been doing some interior work myself. And a question that I was trying to answer for myself is, can you name a time where you don't feel like you have to be aggressive or try overly hard to get someone to do what you're looking for them to do, that you can just be yourself very calmly and at peace and that kind of thing. And my first thought was in spiritual direction with you, that you are really able to create a gentle, peaceful space for us to work in, even though we meet over Zoom, just like we are right now. And I wondered, is that a Mary thing? Is that a spiritual director? I mean, you're the only one I've ever had so far. Is that technique? Is that a result of, where you are in your relationship with the Lord, that you're able to bring someone into that space yourself? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. I hope it's all of the above. It's really a stance. I wouldn't say it's a technique, but it's rooted in a belief that if we give my directee and God the time and the space, that things will be revealed that don't have to be forced. And that especially in our culture, we work for things, right? We work hard, and we admire people who work hard, and we like it at the end of the day when we can say we got all this done. Spiritual direction is really about looking at what's being done in us. And I'm more of an introvert, without a doubt. But I find that one of the greatest struggles is people come and they're so harsh with themselves. The sins that people feel that they carry, or mistakes that they've made. And those things become blocks to loving themselves, and then being able to accept and experience God's love.
Mm-hmm.
Too often I find people, Dave, that it's not that they don't feel love, they don't see themselves as lovable. And so that we have to work through that with God's care and his gentleness.
Knowing whose we are, right? Not just who
Mm-hmm.
we are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you feel that everyone, no matter where they are in their spiritual journey, is a good candidate for spiritual direction? Or is there a certain point at which it starts to make more sense for someone?
Well, I actually don't think about it that much. If somebody comes to me and they have certain questions, I listen to those questions and decide, are they asking me for pastoral counseling or guidance? Are they asking me for mentoring, or are they asking for spiritual direction? So I have to make a discernment.
I see.
Yeah.
And how do you, this is the first time you've mentioned mentoring. How does that differ?
Well, I'll have people come to me and ask very directly, like how to do something, right?
Okay.
Or how to learn something. Well, that's, to me, is more mentoring. And all of these things have touch points, right? The pastoral, I can't say I wouldn't say I'm a purist in any of it,
Sure.
because things can happen in someone's life. They come to me for spiritual direction, and then something happens in their life where they might need more guidance, or they're asking that of me.
Right.
But I'm always led by them.
Right.
And I always try very hard to be faithful to what it is. Like what brought us into this relationship. If it was spiritual direction, then I want to stay there. If it's counseling, then I'll stay there. But I can't say that I don't do a little of both,
right,
along the way.
Yeah, there's definitely been sessions. I can think of maybe one or two where whatever I was bringing up, you're like, okay, this is not going to be a spiritual direction session for us. this is like, I can give you advice. Maybe I'm your friend today. I'm not your spiritual director. I just need to be your friend right now. And I'm going to talk to you about this. And we did that. And that was great. So, I imagine it's not always that overt when you make that decision, but it was definitely helpful for me.
Right. It usually isn't that overt. And there are times when someone will kind of move in a direction. And then I think, as a spiritual director, part of my call is to bring them back, because we often want to go to our head, and spiritual direction, certainly that's included, right? But we're looking at where God is working, where God is calling, where the invitation is. And so I kind of pull somebody back, or the Holy Spirit actually does the work through me.
Right. Do you find that your spirituality has changed or has grown through your work as a spiritual director for others?
Hands down, the answer to that is yes. I'm so deeply humbled by the just unspeakable ways, immeasurable ways that God manifests God's self in the people who come and they share their most sacred stories with me. And I am changed. Their witness to me to be willing to go to these places that are so hard sometimes. Spiritual direction can take on a true confessional kind of place for some people, and their courage is just amazing to me. And the trust that anything that's shared in this time is going to be held with, not just with seeing it in a confidential way, but in a covenantal way. That this is beyond just, I'm going to keep your trust. I'm going to keep you in love.
John, I bet it was hard for our producer Connor to decide where to cut that one off, because Mary is just someone you could listen to for a long, long time.
Yeah, you're really lucky, Dave. You seem like a really great director.
Oh, thank you. I think so too. I know so, but I also have never had another one, so I don't really know. But what she said there's a quote that's been attributed to like a million different people. The farthest distance is the 18 inches between the head and the heart, right? And that's so much of the inner work for all of us, I think, is to, at least people like me who maybe have found their way into the faith through truth more than goodness or beauty. Here I am studying theology, and I'll tell you, like, I'm grateful for my education, but it's not moving me out of my head. That's not what that does, right? If anything, it reinforces it.
Right.
Well, maybe one thing I want to ask you is, as a priest who is also a spiritual director for others, I wondered if there is, Mary said sometimes it feels like a confessional at times, where people are kind of getting things off their chest. And I wondered if for you, and obviously you've never been, I think you've never been a spiritual director before you were a priest. Is that right? You've only been a spiritual director since becoming a priest.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. I just wondered if you think that people are if there's less of a division between confession and spiritual direction because you're a priest versus people who meet with lay people, for example.
Yeah, it's a very complicated thing in some ways. I mean, people have to get something off their chest in some way, and they want to be able to have a vulnerable space to do that. I know that a lot of times people really look at confession as a place to go even maybe more vulnerable, so to speak, or to get really raw. And in spiritual direction, you're kind of alluding to maybe your weaknesses and your challenges, but you may not go all the way because you want to try to understand more of the context of things, not just kind of rattling off a list, so to speak, of the actual things you've done that you're not proud of, for example. So people approach this stuff in lots of different ways. I think that unfortunately people still have a very legalistic way of understanding what confession is. So you have that to contend with, that like you go to confession because this is the place where you're going to get right with God again. And essentially God's going to bless you because of it. I always like to look at confession more as an opportunity for gratitude and thanksgiving for the life that we have, and for us recognizing there's times where we've not been grateful for that. And it's in those moments where we've sought out other things to try to replace the gifts that God has given to us, trying to do it our own way. So I don't look at confession as being a place where, you're out of God's graces. Now you're back in God's graces because you said a few words to kind of get you back in line. I just think it's an act of gratitude. So I don't know if that answers the question that you're trying to say, but it just makes me think about a lot of different things. Like, they should, I guess, complement each other, but I think that there maybe needs to be a better understanding of what's happening at confession too, to understand how that would relate to the quote unquote confessional experience of spiritual direction.
Did her approach resonate with you, where she kind of says, all right, I need to give space for my directee and God to kind of be together and see what God is doing and that kind of thing. It sounds a lot like what I've heard you say about spiritual direction.
Well, yeah, I mean, my experience is that I just want to be able to see how God's working in someone's life. That's all I'm really interested in. I'm not really interested in directing them anywhere. In fact, I think spiritual direction is just a bad term. I just don't think that we have people directing us, maybe guiding us. Maybe that might be a better way, but directing, I don't think so. I mean, I'm always going to be in awe of what God is doing, and so therefore, how do I show up to be able to reverence that presence in the person, which is what Mary was saying in her practice. And that's how you get surprised, and that's how things can seem to be very outside the box. And it really has to be a complete no judgment zone. Like anything's up for grabs in a certain way because you just are so intrigued, if that's the right word, or maybe just in awe of how God can work through anything. As my one friend says, God will reveal his love to us by any means necessary. So what are those means that a person has been open to receive God's love? And that's going to look different from person to person. There's nothing that's prescriptive about that.
Yeah, that's great. I agree with you about calling it spiritual direction is a little bit of a misnomer, but we're still going to call this episode spiritual direction because that's what people, that's the only way that anyone's going to find this thing, unless they're here listening to every episode, which in that case, I really appreciate. But, let's get into the next guest. One of the issues we've been seeing with Catholics seeking spiritual direction is that they often just don't know where to start looking in the first place. Well, down in the Diocese of Charleston in South Carolina, they've actually been developing a rather robust spiritual direction program that includes an Office of Spiritual Directors, as well as a list of available spiritual directors by parish. We spoke with Deacon Tom Whalen, who has been a spiritual director since 2018, about how the diocese has expanded access to spiritual direction. So we became connected because I had read about all the good things that the Diocese of Charleston was doing in terms of bringing spiritual direction in a bigger way to the faithful of the diocese. And it was your name that appeared as the kind of lead at the department level. As we talked earlier, I know that you were being modest when it came in terms of taking credit, but I know that you were behind this. So tell us, how you have brought set a spiritual direction to the Diocese of Charleston, how you identified the need, how you worked to serve that need, what was required to make it happen, all that good stuff.
That's a very simple question, and I'm going to try to make the answer as condensed and brief as possible. When I was in diaconate formation, one of the requirements is that you have a spiritual director, and you meet with your spiritual director routinely. And I was fortunate. I had a spiritual director. It's over 15 years now. He's a Benedictine monk. And this was the largest class of diaconate candidates that the diocese ever had, because we didn't have a class for a number of years. So out of 38 of us, there was only probably less than 10 who raised their hand when they said they had a spiritual director. So it was quite obvious to me, and I gained so much from spiritual direction with my director, who's also my confessor, that immediately it hit me like a ton of bricks that there is an incredible need. So with that need, and I was blessed with my spiritual direction for so many years that I thought, well, after I get ordained, God willing, I'll find a spiritual direction program, and I would investigate and look at, and God's grace, become a spiritual director. And my wife joined me in that search as well. So I did a search, and there aren't that many opportunities in the Southeast. We're considered a mission diocese in South Carolina, and the diocese is the entire state of South Carolina. So it's a large geographic area. But there were programs in the area, but they weren't Catholic programs per se. So with that, I found a program at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama, and they had a remote center at the Ignatius House in Atlanta, which is about a 4-hour drive from where I live. So every month we would go down there, and Spring Hill had this program. It's a 2-year graduate level program and includes summers as well. And it was life-changing. And so the diaconate's life-changing, and this was life-changing as well. So halfway through the program, I spoke to the creator of the program, Father Chris Viscardi, who's the chairman of the theology department at Spring Hill College. And I said, would you be willing to bring this into the Diocese of South Carolina? And he immediately said yes. Then my next step was to go to our bishop. The spiritual directors now operate, Catholic spiritual directors that are approved by the diocese under their pastor, and I'm the coordinator for the diocese. So we have taken it away from anything central in the chancery other than me, and I'm kind of a support to the priests and the spiritual directors and training programs. I'm kind of the filter, but they don't report to me in any way. They work under their pastors that our bishop wanted, and that's worked out very well.
So, John, there's obviously a need for spiritual directors. There's a greater demand than supply, it seems, most of the time that I'm talking to people about it. We heard that in the webinar series that we did. And, do you think that having the diocese kind of organize something like this is a good thing? Do you think more dioceses should be doing this to try to make spiritual direction more readily available and, reliable spiritual direction that would be useful for people?
Well, I definitely don't think it would hurt. I think that as anything happens on a diocesan level, you're dealing with things that I would imagine get vetted for a certain particular type of perspective, let's just say, or a way of looking at things, or having certain types of expectations for training and whatnot. And that could be good, or it could also be maybe not the best thing for certain people, because it kind of maybe someone's not going to find the right person given just the approved list, so to speak. It just varies. I don't know. I mean, but overall, I think it's probably a good thing, because it's just a very maybe easy way for people to at least get this journey started as to where to look for someone. So I think that dioceses should be providing services like that. I mean, if we have an infrastructure, we should use it for the good, right? So I think that might be a good way of doing it. I mean, because what other options are there out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, I had to find mine kind of through personal relationships, but there certainly are some websites that help people to find spiritual directors. We can link those in the show notes, by the way. But yeah, it's not that easy to find people. And he makes the point. We didn't include this part of the conversation, but he made the point when we were talking to him that you probably don't want to necessarily go to a priest. And I think the reason he was saying that is because almost all priests are pastors these days, and pastors are completely overwhelmed with running parishes. And so and I found that myself. When I talked to a pastor friend of mine, he was like, hey, at the end of a confession, actually, he says to me, hey, you need a spiritual director. And I'm like, I know, I'm looking for one. I'm like, are you offering? And he's like, well, let me know if you can't find one. Like they're too busy. I would have felt guilty if I asked him. So I think that's the point he was making. Yeah,
it's really interesting, because I mean, I think that it is one of the more exciting parts of, let's say, being a priest, or just really being someone who's on their own spiritual journey, to be walking with someone else. So it's kind of a shame that other responsibilities would get in the way of that.
Yeah. Breaking the trend from our previous two guests, last up is Hans Platte, founder and president of Vinia Research. Hans and his company are who we partnered with for our discipleship study, and we had him on to get a little more insight into some of the data we got back, as well as his own experience with spiritual direction. One thing that was surprising to me was the only stat that we got at literally 100%, statistically significant 100%, which was 100% of people currently receiving spiritual direction said that spiritual direction was available in their parish community or another faith community to which they belong. And that was sort of a controversial stat, because it begs the question, did they really understand what we meant by spiritual direction? That is a reasonable question to ask, because when we started the study, I didn't have a spiritual director, and now I do. And I definitely would have worded it differently in our question had I had one already. I think we can take that with a grain of salt, that maybe not every single person who answered that in the positive was referring to a consistent ongoing relationship with someone who they meet with regularly in order to discern. I think some people probably just thought of spiritual direction as loosely, like whenever I talk to my priest about stuff that I'm going through or whatever. That being said, there's still some truth there. And I think the truth is that it is not widely available, and people take advantage of things that are available to them, and they don't go searching for things that aren't readily available. So that was a huge takeaway for me.
Yeah, nice. And I agree. I use to have a spiritual director, but then he moved. He was assigned a different parish, and so he's further away. But it is
Yeah.
difficult. So I don't think we do a good job in the church at making it clear what we have at our disposal or how to go about seeking something. Well, people, I mean, a lot of people didn't even know what spiritual direction is, right? So we, again, within our sample, yes, maybe. But when you look at the general, Catholics and those in the pew and those that might benefit from it, well, it took a priest to tell me during confession that I could benefit from spiritual direction. It was one of those confessions that was at one of these penance events. So while there was a line, actually, I think it was the last one in line, and there was no rush, I guess. So it was almost like a mini spiritual direction. And so I was able to say a little bit more than I would normally say in the confessional. And before that, I hadn't even heard of spiritual direction. Yeah, but the way he said it, it was like, oh, this sounds really appealing to me. I should seek it out. And then I said, well, what about you? And he said, yes. And that made my search very easy. But then when he left, I was like, okay, now it's becoming a little bit more difficult, right? So because it's not only finding a spiritual director, but it's finding one that you think you can, open up to and have this relationship.
That's a good fit.
You talk a lot about very deep personal things, and so it's finding that right match.
Absolutely. It's amazing how similar our stories are, by the way, because I had that I wanted a spiritual director on my heart for probably a year, maybe more than a year. And, I got to say, it is pretty aligned with this. Maybe I already wanted one when we started wording the study, but it was right around that same time. And I went to a confession and I had all but given up. It had been a while. I was not finding one in the area and everything. And I went to confession and the priest was like, you need a spiritual director. And I was like, are you offering? And he's like, because he was a pastor of a parish that I was at the time, but we weren't parishioners there. We weren't members. And he's like, let me know if you can't find one. Which I think is a lot of people's, I bet there's a lot of reticence to even ask a pastor because everyone knows how busy they are. Yeah. And I ended up finding one through just talking about the need through a friend of a friend. She's like, oh, well, my spiritual director is awesome. I bet she would take you on even over Zoom. And my spiritual director is based in Indiana, by the way. Yeah. So you never know. But you mentioned that you would fall into the group in our study that would say that they used to have one, but no longer. And that's just because it's so hard to find the right person. Is that right?
Correct. So mine moved about, was reassigned and moved about an hour away. And in theory, I can make that. I guess we could do Zoom. I mean, it was nice that I was able to. He was also my confessor, and so that was helpful in that respect. But and I've actually just recently contemplated going back. There's another priest in our parish who's retired, and I think he'd be an excellent spiritual director. And I asked him about it, but he's like, no, he just doesn't. He's not in that phase anymore. He's like, I'm retired. He's a bit older, but I still think he would be an excellent spiritual director. So anyway, it's just a matter of finding the right person.
Yeah, I mean, John, finding a spiritual director is hard because even when you think you found one, it doesn't mean that they're, it's like dating almost, right? It's got to be the right timing for everyone and a good fit.
Yeah, I guess the thing too that people probably, if anyone even knows anything about spiritual direction as a possibility in one's life, people who do know about it would tend to think that priests or religious sisters or religious brothers are the go-to people to go to have a spiritual director. And we know that there's been lots of lay people who are very good at this and who've been trained for it now too. So I think that's another part of the whole process that's not really even taken into account, because if anyone is thinking about spiritual direction, they're like, oh, well, that means you go to the priest, and the priest may not be the right person. It's just a very complicated process, unfortunately, right? I think maybe we could look at this more from other places right now that seem to have comparable types of relationships. I'm thinking of like coaches, mentors, people who are in 12-step programs who have a mentor or a person to walk with them. It's like that type of relationship you're looking for to discuss, things that you would characterize as on a spiritual level, things that seem to be ways to engage with the world that really helps us to look deep at what's being offered to us and seeing how that speaks to us and what it's propelling us to do. So I think there are people who are doing that kind of work in other different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's a way of trying to explain that spiritual direction is something akin to that, because I think in some ways it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I think I've used the term spiritual journey sometime in this episode because I'm still on this path trying to get away from doing that. Right. But if you think about the integrated life, then you're right. Like someone who maybe is called a life coach or something like that might be absolutely a great, effectively spiritual director, right? As long as they're integrating kind of the entire life into what they're guiding this person in doing. I think a coach is also an appropriate sort of moniker for this. Well, that's it for this episode of Religion to Reality. We hope you learned as much as we did from these conversations, and hopefully you'll be walking away with some new insights on spiritual direction. Thank you again to our guests, Mary Glowaski, Deacon Tom Whalen, and Hans Plate. You can learn more about what Deacon Tom is up to at charlestondiocese.org/spiritual-directors, and more about Vinea Research at vinearesearch.com. Please join us again next week, where we'll be talking about evangelization, from personal barriers to professional experience. Once again, I'm your host, Dave Plisky, joined by my friend and co-host, Father John Gribowich, and we hope to see you again next time. Religion to Reality is an initiative of DeSales Media created by me, Dave Plisky, and is produced and edited by Connor Donnelly. If you found value in our conversation, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you love the show, ratings and reviews go a long way toward letting others know about the show. Go to religiontoreality.org for more details and resources. And if you are ready to take the next step and join in community with us, check out the Called Learning Community, co-founded by Father John Gribowich. Go to calledcommunity.com to sign up for our free online gatherings.